Hi, my name is Brad Constantine, and this is a podcast of the New Testament. I'll be using as the text the King James Version along with the Joseph Smith translation. Although this is not an official recording of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, every effort's been made to be as doctrinally accurate as possible. I'll also be using quotes from general authorities of the Church, the apostles and prophets, and BYU professors and others, and every word out of the Scriptures themselves. So if you're ready for a really detailed analysis of the New Testament, you've come to the right place. Welcome. Hello there, welcome back. This is going to be for Matthew chapter 17, which will also cover some of Mark chapter 9 and Luke chapter 9. Alrighty, let me read the heading to Matthew 17. It says, Jesus is transfigured before Peter, James, and John on the Mount. Jesus heals a lunatic, tells of his coming death, and pays taxes in a miraculous manner. Verse 1, and after 6 days, so remember that Jesus told Peter that he would hold the keys of the kingdom, so now it's a week later, and this is when this happens. And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart. Both Mount Tabor and Mount Hermon have been identified by church leaders as the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus went up to be prepared for death. This was also to fortify his apostles to be able to withstand the shameful insults and humiliation of the cross. The Transfiguration probably occurred in October, 6 months before Jesus' death. This probably happened at night. Also, because the mountain is not named, but it's believed to be either Mount Tabor or Mount Hermon, most Bible scholars believe it was Mount Hermon. President Kimball visited Mount Tabor in 1980 and suggested that he believed it to be the correct place. Verse 2, in Matthew, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. Peter, James, and John were transfigured or changed to another condition, a terrestrial order. So transfiguration is a temporary condition, after which they return back to their mortal celestial bodies. Verse 3, and behold, there appeared unto them Moses, which signifies the law, and Elias, or Elijah, the prophets, talking with him. Moses and Elijah are only 6 months away from being themselves resurrected. Verse 4 of Mark says, and there appeared unto them Elias, which is the Greek version of the word Elijah, and Moses, or in other words, John the Baptist and Moses. That's the Joseph Smith translation of Mark. John may have been there as the last legal administrator under the Old Covenant to symbolize that the law was fulfilled and all old things were done away, thus contrasting his position with that of Peter, James, and John, who were then becoming the first legal administrators of the New Covenant, or the New Kingdom. And they were talking with Jesus. At this critical and crucial period, the beginning of the end, visitants from the unseen world came to comfort and support him. Both the letter of the record and the spirit in which the recorder wrote indicate that Moses and Elijah conversed with their Lord on the glorious consummation of his mission in mortality, a consummation recognized in the law personified by Moses and the prophets represented by Elijah, and an event of supreme import determining the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets and the glorious inauguration of a new and higher order as part of the divine plan. That last part was by James E. Talmage. Elder McConkie also said, Moses, the great prophet-statesman whose name symbolized the law, and Elijah the Tishbite, a prophet of so great fame that his name had come to typify and symbolize the collective wisdom and insight of all the prophets. Moses held the keys of the gathering of Israel and the leading of the 10 tribes from the land of the north. Elijah, the keys of the sealing power. There are the keys which they conferred upon Peter, James, and John upon the Mount, and which they also conferred upon Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery in the Kirtland Temple nearly 2,000 years later. Both of them were translated beings and had bodies of flesh and bones, a status they apparently enjoyed so that they could confer keys upon mortal men. When these two holy men appeared in this dispensation to restore again their keys and powers, they came as resurrected personages, and that was by Bruce R. McConkie. In Luke it says, who appeared in glory and spake of his departure or death, and also of his resurrection, which he should accomplish in Jerusalem, or at Jerusalem. But Peter and they who were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Verse 4 of Matthew says, then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. Since this was done 6 months prior to Jesus' death, this was probably done around the Feast of Tabernacles in the fall of the year, which would explain why they're suggesting that they build tabernacles, because that's what they make during the Feast of Tabernacles. This also may be an attempt for them to delay the visitors from leaving. For he knew not what to say, for they were sore afraid. Back to Matthew 5. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. In about a year's time, the voice of the Father will be heard again, proclaiming his beloved Son to the Nephites. Verse 6 says, And when the disciples heard the voice, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, be not afraid. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man, save Jesus only. In verse 8 of Mark it says, And suddenly when they had looked round about with great astonishment, they saw no man any more, save Jesus only with themselves, and immediately they departed. Verse 9, And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. This is too sacred of an experience to mention to others. They also see the transfiguration of the earth at the Savior's second coming. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 63, it says, Nevertheless, he that endureth in faith and doeth my will, the same shall overcome and shall receive an inheritance upon the earth, when the day of transfiguration shall come, when the earth shall be transfigured, even according to the pattern which was shown unto mine apostles upon the mount, of which account the fullness ye have not yet received. John later said, We beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father. Peter said, There they were eyewitnesses of his majesty. Peter, James, and John were themselves transfigured before him, that's Joseph Smith, even as Moses, the three Nephites, Joseph Smith, and many prophets of all ages have been transfigured, thus enabling them to entertain angels, see visions, and comprehend the things of God. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus gave the keys of the kingdom to Peter, James, and John. John the Baptist also apparently was present. It may well be that other unnamed prophets, either coming as translated beings or as spirits from paradise, were also present. It appears that Peter, James, and John received their own endowments while on the mountain, and the more sure word of prophecy their callings and elections made sure. Apparently, Jesus himself was strengthened and encouraged by Moses and Elijah so as to be prepared for the infinite sufferings and agony ahead of him in connection with working out the infinite and eternal atonement. That was by James E. Talmage. Certainly, the three chosen apostles were taught in plainness of his death and also his resurrection. God the Father, overshadowed and hidden by a cloud, was present on the mountain, although our Lord's three associates, as far as the record stipulates, heard only his voice and did not see his form. These things happened on the Mount of Transfiguration. 1, Jesus singled out Peter, James, and John from the rest of the 12, took them up an unnamed mountain. There he was transfigured before them, and they beheld his glory. 2, Peter, James, and John were themselves transfigured before him. And 3, Moses and Elijah appeared on the mountain, and they and Jesus gave the keys of the kingdom to Peter, James, and John. 4, John the Baptist, previously beheaded by Herod, apparently was also present, although as a spirit. Verse 5, Peter, James, and John saw in vision the transfiguration of the earth that is to take place at the second coming, when the millennial era is ushered in. 6, it appears that Peter, James, and John received their own endowments while on the mountain. 7, apparently Jesus himself was strengthened and encouraged by Moses and Elijah so as to be prepared for the infinite sufferings and agony of the atonement. 8, certainly the three chosen apostles were taught in plainness of his death and also his resurrection. 9, it should also have been apparent to them that the old dispensations of the past, symbolized by Moses and Elijah, had faded away. 10, apparently God the Father, overshadowed and hidden by a cloud, was present on the mountain, although Peter, James, and John apparently heard only his voice and did not see his form. Back to the first presidency, Peter, James, and John also received their calling election made sure on the Mount of, I think I said that. Okay. In summary, we understand that the three apostles experienced the following. They received the keys of the kingdom, keys to the gathering and to the sealing power. They received a sacred gift of knowledge, perhaps what we call an endowment. That was by Joseph Fielding Smith. And they had their calling and election made sure. They had a vision of the earth in its millennial paradisiacal state. And that's in verse by verse. Verse 10, and they kept that saying with themselves, questioning one another what the rising from the dead should mean. Elder Packer said, I have come to believe also that it is not wise to continually talk of unusual spiritual experiences. They are to be guarded with care and shared only when the Spirit itself prompts you to use them to the blessing of others. Back to Matthew, verse 10, and his disciples asked him, saying, why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things, as the prophets have written. So there must be some hidden meaning to this, to Elias. Having just experienced some indelible and personal moments with a prophet they called Elias, the three chief apostles now had additional matter about which they wanted to inquire of Jesus. Even the scribes note that in the Scriptures there is some reference to Elias coming. What does that mean? Jesus' response, as given in the Joseph Smith translation, helps explain. There are actually two Eliases referred to here. One to prepare and one to restore, and that's by Skinner and Ogden. Defining who Elias is, Elder Bruce R. McConkie wrote, correcting the Bible by the Spirit of revelation, the prophet restored a statement of John the Baptist which says that Christ is the Elias who was to restore all things. By revelation, we are also informed that the Elias who was to restore all things is the angel Gabriel, who was known in mortality as Noah. From the same authentic source, we also learn that the promised Elias is John the Revelator. Thus, there are three different revelations which name Elias as being three different persons. What are we to conclude? By finding answer to the question, by whom has the restoration been effected, we shall find who Elias is, and find there is no problem in harmonizing these apparently contradictory revelations. Who has restored all things? Was it one man? Certainly not. Many angelic ministrants have been sent from the courts of glory to confer keys and powers to commit their dispensations and glories again to men on earth. At the least, the following have come: Moroni, John the Baptist, Peter, James, and John, Moses, Elijah, Elias, Gabriel, Raphael, and Michael. Since it is apparent that no one messenger has carried the whole burden of the restoration, but rather that each has come with a specific endowment from on high, it becomes clear that Elias is a composite personage. The expression must be understood to be a name and a title for those whose mission it was to commit keys and powers to men in this final dispensation. That was by Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding McConkie. Verse 13, and again I say unto you that Elias has come already, concerning whom it is written, Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And they knew him not, and have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. But I say unto you, who is Elias? Behold, this is Elias, whom I send to prepare the way before me. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist, and also of another who should come and restore all things, as it is written by the prophets. And we're also probably talking there about Joseph Smith. That's what he probably meant there. Back to verse 14, and when they were come to the multitude, there came to him a certain man kneeling down to him, and saying, And it came to pass that on the next day, when they were come down from the hill, much people met him. That's from Luke. In Mark it says, And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with them. And straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him saluted him. And Jesus asked the scribes, What questioned ye with them? And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, who hath a dumb spirit, that is a devil. In Matthew, verse 15, it says, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic and sore vexed, and for oft times he falleth into the fire, and oft into the water. In Mark it says, And he foameth and gnasheth, and his teeth and pineth away. And in Luke it says, in verse 39, Lo, a spirit taketh him, and he suddenly crieth out, and it teareth him, that he foameth, and bruising him hardly departeth from him. In verse 16 of Matthew, I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And then Mark says, And they brought him And they brought Jesus unto him, and when the man saw him, immediately he was torn by the spirit, and he fell on the ground, and he wallowed in foaming. And Jesus asked his father, How long a time is it since this came up unto him? And his father said, When a child, and ofttimes it hath cast him into the fire, and into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst, I ask thee to have compassion on us, and help us. Jesus said unto him, If thou wilt believe all things, I shall say unto you, This is possible to him that believeth. And immediately the father of the child cried out, and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief. That is the humble condition all mortals must feel as we approach the Lord for help. We do have faith up to a point. That is where we turn to him and plead, as did this father, for help to increase our faith. In the end, we are totally dependent on him for blessings to meet our needs, and only he can match our faith with all that is necessary for us to see the miracle. If we throw ourselves at his feet and humbly petition him for compassion, he, or we, can cast out any evil spirit or evil character trait or any negative circumstance in our lives. And that was again by Skinner and Ogden in verse by verse. And Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the child and delivered him again to his father. Verse 25 of Mark says, When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, I charge thee to come out of him, and enter no more into him. Now the dumb and that deaf spirit cried and rent him, and sore, and came out of him. And he was as one dead, insomuch that many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And in Matthew, verse 18, it says, And Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. In Luke, it says, And they were all amazed at the mighty power of God. Back to Matthew, verse 19, Then came the disciples to Jesus apart, and said, Why could we not cast him out? And Jesus said unto them, Because of your unbelief, or little faith, for verily I say unto you, if ye have faith as a grain of mustard seed, ye shall say unto this mountain, Remove hence, or remove to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. The idea of moving mountains was a figurative expression about overcoming difficulty, and it was common among the Jews, though God can move mountains if his work calls for such miracles. And that was by Skinner and Ogden again. Howbeit this kind goeth not out, but by prayer and fasting. James E. Talmage said, Fasting, when practiced in prudence, and genuine prayer are conducive to the development of faith with its accompanying power for good. Individual application of this principle may be made with profit. Have you some besetting weakness, some sinful indulgence that you have vainly tried to overcome? Like the malignant demon that Christ rebuked in the boy, your sin may be of a kind that goeth out only through prayer and fasting. Bruce R. McConkie said, By faith all things are possible. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. No sickness is too severe, no disease too disabling, no plague too destructive to be cured by the power that is faith. Whether in life or in death, nothing is withheld from those who abide the law of faith, which enables them to receive it. But in practice, even among the most righteous mortals, faith or power is enjoyed in varying degrees, and some maladies require the exercise of greater healing power than others. Also by Skinner and Ogden, they said, This particular trial, possession by an evil spirit, Jesus taught, requires more than just priesthood and faith, two of the greatest powers in the universe, but casting out this kind of evil spirit requires in addition much prayer and fasting. Additional strength and command of the powers of heaven come through mighty prayer and through persistent and effective fasting. Back to Matthew, verse 22, And while they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them, The Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men. And they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again. And they were exceeding sorry. In Mark it says, And he taught his disciples, and said unto them, The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him. And after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day. But they understood not that saying, and were afraid to ask him. Verse 24, And when they were come to Capernaum, they that received tribute came to Peter and said, Doth not your master pay tribute? Tribute money was collected as an annual half-shekel temple tax used for the upkeep of the temple. Every Israelite male 20 years and older was required to pay the annual assessment. The collectors may have wondered because priests and rabbis claimed exemption. Jesus gave instructions for finding the needed coin in the mouth of a fish. Could he not have earned it by fishing? Considering who he was, Jesus condescended to pay the money, but demonstrated his exalted status by fulfilling the law in a supernatural way by a miracle without parallel. In other words, Jesus really didn't have to pay the tax. After all, the temple was his, wasn't it? Back to verse 25, he said, Yea, and when he was come into the house, Peter's house in Capernaum, Jesus rebuked him, or spoke to him first, saying, What thinkest thou, Simon? Of whom do the kings of the earth take custom or tribute? Of their own children, or of strangers? And Peter said, Of strangers. Jesus said unto him, Then are the children free? Notwithstanding, lest we should offend them, go thou to the sea, cast a hook, and take up the fish that first cometh up. And when thou hast opened his mouth, thou shalt find a piece of money. Take that, take and give unto them for me and thee. Our Savior's work on earth was marked throughout by his acknowledgement of the existing powers of the land, both Jewish and Roman. When the tax collector called for the tribute money demanded by the hierarchy, Christ directed that the tax be paid, and even invoked a miraculous circumstance whereby the money could be provided. And that was by James Talmage. A stater, a coin equal to the exact amount of the tax for the two persons. Why did Jesus pay this tax? As the king's son, he need not have done so, but such a course would have offended the Jews unnecessarily, perhaps hindering the conversion of some of them. Why was the money provided in a miraculous way? If our Lord had paid the levy from available funds, or from money earned by catching and selling fish, he would have thus submitted to the tax as though he were a man in the same class as Peter and the others. But by providing the money through the use of knowledge which no mortal man possessed, he dramatized both the voluntary nature of his submission to the law and the exalted nature of his position as the king's son. That was by Bruce R. McConkie. That's the end of the chapter, and that's the end of the reading for today. Anyway, we'll see you next time. Bye.